Senator from Ohio.
I ask consent to suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I been here for a little while this evening, and have listened to a lot of the concerns of my colleagues. And I believe I have something tonight that will provide some common ground that hopefully we can all support. I come to this conversation having been twice elected and entrusted as the Chief Elections Officer of the state of Ohio, as being elected their Secretary of State. I oversaw elections, presidential elections, in 2012 and 2016, as well as midterm elections in 2014 and 2018, and many primaries, local elections, special elections, ballot initiatives, on and on and on. I know my election law. I know my election administration, and I believe Ohio is the gold standard for how to run an election. I made my mission clear in that role to make Ohio a place where it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. And many other states do it right. Many other states do it right. They have voter ID laws. They properly maintain the voter rolls. However, other states do not do that. I enforced voter roll maintenance, the voter roll maintenance standards in all 88 counties to make sure that no one could nefariously or accidentally cast a ballot. And this standard was upheld in the case before the U.S. Supreme Court of Husted versus the Philip A. Randolph Institute. And I can tell you, it's a chore to make sure that only legally registered citizens are on the voter rolls, because there are millions of people in this country who can get driver's licenses, who get social security numbers, who are not citizens of the United States of America. They may be here on a visa, a green card, a refugee, someone here on TPS, temporary protected status. They're all get the things that you need to register to vote in many states. And when you're in a swing state, you have lots of outside groups that just want to register everybody because they get paid more and more and more the more people they register, even if those people are not legally allowed to be on the voter rolls. It's an important responsibility. I also launched an annual voter fraud and suppression report, which was a post-mortem on each election cycle, and we found cases every election of fraud and attempted fraud, even with all those safeguards in place. It was rare, but it was real. It was out there. And you may say, well, what's the big deal? It's a few hundred here, a few hundred there. We had 200 elections during my tenure. When you add up the local elections that were decided by one voter tied. Local elections, township trustees, political officials, every vote counts, every vote matters. Ohio then implemented a required photo ID law at the polls, and with these reforms, there has been no evidence of voter suppression. In fact, with all of these measures in place, in the 2024 presidential election, it produced the second highest turnout that we've had in the past 4 presidential elections. And it's not surprising that people don't find it hard to produce an ID when they come vote, because it happens in their lives every single day. I know for me, in the last week, I've had to provide an ID to enter a government building, an ID to rent a car, an ID to stay at a hotel. But many other things we commonly do in life, whether that's someone going to the local store to buy alcohol or tobacco, you name it. Lots of reasons that people have to supply IDs. They're very accustomed to doing it. And they do it all the time. So when they show up at the polls and ask for an ID, They already had it with them because they probably were already asked for it once that day. And in Ohio, and I'm sure other states do, I know other states do this and are perfectly capable of doing it. If you don't have an ID, the state of Ohio will get you one free of charge at the BMV. So, Madam President, when we talk about the Save America Act, it is trying to solve a simple problem, at least the provision that I'm here to talk about tonight, that we need to make sure that we know who is coming to the polls to cast their vote, because election integrity matters. But there are 14 states that do not have voter ID laws, even though 80% of Americans think it's a good idea. This is one of those issues that whether you talk to Democrats, Republicans, or independents, they say, yeah, photo ID makes sense. It's just kind of common sense that we would want to know who's voting when we cast a ballot to elect presidents and senators and governors. And like I said, I've tried to listen. I've heard my Democrat colleagues say that they don't oppose photo ID laws. Heard Senator Schumer say our objection as Democrats is not to a photo ID. Heard Senator Fetterman say he supports a photo ID law, and I guess if I could quote him, if the GOP wants real reform over a show vote, put out a clean, standalone bill, and I'm an aye. Well, that's what I'm doing tonight. The voter under this legislation could present a photo ID of any of the following: a state-issued driver's license that includes a photo and an expiration date, state ID that has a photo of the individual and an expiration date, U.S. passport, valid U.S. passport, a valid military ID, or a valid ID issued by a tribal government that includes a photo of the individual and an expiration date. Pretty simple, not complicated, easy to do. It's proven effective because many states already do it. We certainly do it in Ohio. I will add that it's also easier to administer when you have a photo ID and you're an election official. Because we have our neighbors show up every 2 or 4 years to work at the polls. They might be young children or young adults. We know we let high school students participate in that in Ohio. It might be a senior citizen. It could be anybody who decides that they're going to give of their day to go sit at the polls and check in voters. When you have a photo ID, it's simple. You just look at it or you slide it through the card reader and the voter's information pops up and you know which precinct they're from, which ballot they have, and whether or not they're legally allowed to vote. Rather than trying to do it the old way, the bureaucratic way of having to look through poll books and making every poll worker who works there once every 2 or 4 years become a signature reading expert to try to determine whether or not somebody is truly allowed to vote in that precinct and they are who they say they are. So I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle realize or really do support a photo ID law, because this legislation is the simple, easy, proven way to do it. So, Madam President, showing a photo ID is common sense. The American people support it by an 80-20 margin. And as I've been saying for more than a decade and a half, it is possible to make it both easy to vote and hard to cheat, and we should make that a national standard with a photo ID law that is easy to implement and is proven effective. Passing voter ID requirements is common sense, and passing this provision that I offer tonight, that's part of the Save America Act, is right for election integrity, and it's the right thing to do for voter confidence, and I urge a yes vote. So now, Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Resolution 4155, which is at the desk, and further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table. And I recognize Madam President, that I have some colleagues here that may want to offer something along with.
So you have to withdraw that request that you were recommending.
Oh, then Madam President, let me withdraw the request and allow my colleagues to speak to the.
Thank you,
Senator
Madam.
from Utah.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to thank my friend and distinguished colleague, the senator from Ohio, for his observations, for his insights on this. This is one of the many true talents we have in the Senate. He's particularly well qualified in this area, given his experience in the state of Ohio with mastering the election laws of that state and the federal election laws that overlap with state election laws. I'm not sure there's anyone in the Senate currently or who has ever served here who has a greater knowledge of these laws and the way that they intersect. For the same reasons articulated by the senator from Ohio, I think this is an exceptionally good idea. It's not every bill where it makes sense to separate out a provision and try to pass that provision on its own, separate from the rest of the text of the bill. But this is one of those instances where it makes sense. Now, don't get me wrong. Neither I nor the senator from Ohio are suggesting that we still don't need the rest of the Save America Act. That's not our point. The point is that these are separately divisible, such that they could be enacted separately. And insofar as there is a greater degree of consensus with regard to the voter ID component of the Save America Act than there are with regard to the citizenship components, it makes sense for us to get this done now. Let's pass it. Let's pass it right now. Let's pass it by unanimous consent. Let's make this law, and then we can proceed back to deal with the rest of the issues within the Save America Act. This is what progress looks like. This is what consensus building looks like. And I thank my friend and colleague from Ohio for raising this. Look, no matter how you feel about the rest of the provisions of the bill, it's not too much to ask somebody to just show who they are when they show up on voting day. That provision is very simple. Let's get this passed. Let's get it done right now.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S 4155, which is at the desk. Further, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
Senator from Oregon.
reserving the right to object, I appreciate the information my colleague from Ohio and my colleague from Utah brought forward. But just minutes ago, another colleague from Alaska was on this floor